The rise of the anti-cult experts. The anti-cult movement has long been a source of both intrigue and controversy, particularly in its claim to liberate individuals from the control of groups like the Unification Church. Central to this movement are its experts, often former members of cults who have since turned their lived experiences into a business. These ex-members, branded as specialists in deprogramming and counseling, frequently present themselves as credible authorities on cult behavior, offering services such as anti-cult workshops, self-help books, and training for law enforcement and mental health professionals. But the legitimacy of these figures and their work has been increasingly called into question, with critics arguing that their motivation often lies in profit and personal gain rather than a genuine desire to help those affected by cult dynamics. One of the most prominent examples is Stephen Hassan, a former Unification Church member who has since become a leading figure in the anti-cult world. Hassan's transformation from a devout unificationist to an anti-cult expert has made him a controversial figure, with detractors questioning whether his work is a sincere effort to support victims or a calculated attempt to exploit his past for financial and emotional capital. Hassan's bite points theory of cult behavior, which he developed from his experiences, has been widely circulated in anti-cult circles, yet his credibility is frequently challenged due to the commercialization of his work and the lack of scientific validation for his methods. Other self-proclaimed anti-cult experts, such as Rick Alan Ross and Margaret Singer, have similarly drawn scrutiny for their aggressive approaches to deprogramming and their reliance on anecdotal rather than evidence-based practices. These figures, often former members of the very groups they now critique, occupy a unique space within the anti-cult landscape, where the line between advocacy and exploitation is frequently blurred. This debate raises fundamental questions about the ethics and effectiveness of anti-cult experts. Are these individuals genuinely committed to improving the lives of those who have left cults, or are they simply capitalizing on the fear and confusion associated with cult dynamics? The article will explore these questions while focusing on figures like Hassan, as well as the broader implications of an industry built on the testimonies of those who have chosen to profit from their past affiliations. As we delve deeper into their motivations and reputations, it becomes clear that the anti-cult movement is not a monolith, and its leaders must be examined with a critical eye to determine the true extent of their impact. The motivations behind the anti-cult movement. The transition from an ex-member of a controversial group like the Unification Church to an anti-cult expert is often framed as a redemptive arc, with figures like Steve Hassan presented as saviors of those still trapped in cults. However, a closer examination of their backgrounds reveals a more complex and arguably self-serving narrative. Many of these individuals did not simply step out of their former organizations and immediately become anti-cult advocates. Instead, their shift into this industry was often driven by a desire for influence, financial gain, and recognition. This transformation is not limited to Hassan. It is a pattern that repeats itself among numerous anti-cult experts who once belonged to the very groups they now critique. For Hassan, the path from Unification Church member to anti-cult speaker and consultant was deeply personal, yet undeniably lucrative. After leaving the church in the early 1980s, he founded the Cult Awareness Network with ex-members, positioning himself as an expert on deprogramming and psychological manipulation. While Hassan's work was initially positioned as a grassroots effort, it quickly became a commercial enterprise, with his lectures and publications becoming major revenue streams. The same trend extends to other figures, such as Rick Alan Ross, who served as a high-ranking deprogrammer for decades before shifting into media and consulting work, and Margaret Singer, whose academic credentials and books on cult behavior have made her one of the most recognizable anti-cult experts. These individuals often emphasize their insider knowledge and first-hand experience, but their motivations extend beyond advocacy. The anti-cult industry is rife with cases where ex-members have leveraged their pasts for professional and financial benefit. Hassan, for example, has built a career around workshops, books, and private counseling sessions, often charging exorbitant fees while advocating for coercive deprogramming tactics. His bite points theory, which categorizes the psychological strategies used by cults, was initially developed as a method to help former members rebuild their identities. However, over time, it has become a cornerstone of his anti-cult business model, used to justify paid interventions and guide law enforcement in their interactions with cults. This commercialization of ex-membership experiences is a recurring theme. Instead of remaining as anonymous advocates or community supporters, many choose to monetize their trauma and turn it into a product. Moreover, the ethical implications of this transition are often overlooked. Critics argue that anti-cult experts, like Hassan, frequently operate without formal academic or clinical training, yet are granted authority within mental health and legal circles as if their experiences alone legitimize their expertise. Their methods, such as aggressive deprogramming and psychological intervention, have been criticized for violating personal autonomy and reinforcing the very power dynamics they claim to combat. By positioning themselves as the ultimate authority on cult behavior, these figures not only profit from their pasts but also shape public perception, often without proper oversight or ethical accountability. The anti-cult industry's reliance on ex-members as both content providers and paid consultants raises fundamental questions about the sincerity of their motivations and the long-term impact of their influence on individuals who have already experienced profound disruption in their lives. Ethical dilemmas in the anti-cult industry. The anti-cult movement, as led by former cult members turned experts, is rife with ethical dilemmas that complicate its perceived legitimacy and effectiveness. Perhaps the most glaring issue is the accusation that these individuals exploit their pasts for profit. Critics argue that while these former members may genuinely have been harmed by their affiliations, their transformation into anti-cult experts often masks a lucrative business strategy. Hassan's well-documented career is a prime example of this phenomenon. After leaving the Unification Church, Hassan did not transition seamlessly into advocacy. Instead, he built a multifaceted enterprise that includes workshops, books, and consulting services. His Bite Points model, while widely promoted as a groundbreaking framework for understanding cult dynamics, has been criticized for lacking empirical support and for being primarily a vehicle to market his other projects. The same pattern is evident in the careers of other figures like Rick Allen Ross and William Schnoes, who have monetized their anti-cult work to the point of commercialization, often charging significant fees for their services while maintaining a veneer of altruism. Another significant ethical issue is the bias inherent in the anti-cult industry, rooted in the ex-members' identities as former participants in the groups they now critique. These individuals often adopt an adversarial stance toward the groups they once belonged to, which can lead to a one-sided or overly simplistic portrayal of their former organizations. This bias is not uncommon, as it is human nature for individuals to reflect on their past decisions with regret and to project the worst aspects of their experiences onto their former communities. However, this tendency can result in a lack of nuance in their analyses, as well as the promotion of narratives that may not reflect the full complexity of the groups in question. For example, Hassan and his peers frequently frame the Unification Church as a universally manipulative and harmful organization, ignoring the fact that many of its members have lived successful, fulfilling lives outside of the group without experiencing maladaptive effects. This kind of portrayal not only risks misrepresentation but also undermines the credibility of anti-cult experts, as it suggests that their assessments are driven by personal vendettas rather than objective analysis. The hypocrisy of these so-called experts is another area of concern. While they hold themselves out as champions of victims and defenders of free will, their methods often involve actions that contradict these principles. For instance, deprogramming, once a cornerstone of the anti-cult industry, has been widely condemned for violating basic ethical standards of consent and autonomy. Hassan, one of the most prominent advocates of deprogramming, has been criticized for justifying this controversial practice, even as its human rights implications have come under increasing scrutiny. Similarly, ex-members like Ross have been accused of using their positions to exert undue influence over families and individuals, often in ways that prioritize their own agendas over the well-being of the people they claim to help. These contradictions raise serious ethical questions about the integrity of these figures and the industry they represent. Rather than acting as impartial advocates for victims, many anti-cult experts have been accused of positioning themselves as intermediaries whose authority is wielded in ways that align more with their personal interests than with the needs of those they purport to assist. The commercialization of anti-cult work further exacerbates these ethical concerns by creating conflicts of interest that can compromise the industry's credibility. When ex-members profit from their anti-cult activities, their motivations can become tangled in financial incentives, which may lead to the promotion of sensationalist or exaggerated claims to maximize their influence and revenue. This phenomenon is particularly evident in the way anti-cult experts market their services. For instance, Hassan's workshops are often structured to generate income for himself and his organizations, with attendees frequently required to pay steep fees to participate in sessions that are framed as life-changing but lack substantial oversight or accountability. In many cases, the personal and financial success of these experts is directly tied to the perpetuation of fear and stigma surrounding cults, regardless of the accuracy of the information they disseminate. By commercializing their anti-cult work, these figures risk reducing a deeply complex and nuanced issue to a commodified product, one that can be bought, sold, and manipulated to suit their needs rather than the needs of the people they claim to help. Ultimately, The ethical challenges faced by anti-cult experts like Hassan are not isolated but indicative of a broader pattern within the industry. Whether through exploitation, bias, hypocrisy, or commercialization, these individuals and their practices highlight the need for a critical evaluation of the anti-cult movement. As we delve deeper into Hassan's career and the histories of other figures, it becomes increasingly evident that the motivations behind their work are as diverse and complex as the groups they critique. This complexity underscores the importance of approaching their narratives with skepticism and a commitment to uncovering the truths that may lie beneath the surface of their public personas and professional endeavors. Analyzing Steve Hassan's career in the anti-cult industry. Steve Hassan's journey from Unification Church member to a leading anti-cult expert is emblematic of the broader trends within the anti-cult movement. His initial involvement with the church was significant and long-term. Hassan joined the Unification Church in the 1970s during its peak period of expansion in North America. Unlike many of his peers, Hassan was not a fleeting participant. He was deeply invested in the organization's mission, participating in its mass weddings, missionary work, and outreach programs. However, his eventual disillusionment and departure from the church in the early 1980s marked a pivotal moment in his life, one that would ultimately lead him to rebrand as an anti-cult advocate. This transition was not merely a personal or moral shift, but a calculated step into a professional field that was ripe for commercialization and expansion. The foundation of Hassan's anti-cult career was laid with the formation of the Cult Awareness Network in 1979, a grassroots organization with ties to the Unification Church. Initially, the Cult Awareness Network was intended as a support group for former members, offering a space for individuals to share their experiences and process their trauma. However, Hassan quickly recognized the potential for this network to evolve into something more lucrative. By the early 1980s, he had begun to professionalize his efforts, positioning himself as a thought leader in the anti-cult space. His approach was unique in that he combined his first-hand experience with an emerging theoretical framework that emphasized psychological manipulation and coercive control. This framework, which he later expanded into his bite points model, became the cornerstone of his work and the primary tool for legitimizing his anti-cult interventions. The bite points model, outlined in Hassan's seminal book, Combating Cult Mind Control, describes the psychological hooks that cults use to maintain control over their members. These bite points were categorized based on the types of manipulative strategies commonly employed by groups like the Unification Church, including fear, guilt, and the promise of salvation. While Hassan's model was lauded by many as an innovative way to understand cult dynamics, it was also heavily criticized for its lack of empirical validation and its tendency to simplify complex human behaviors into a rigid system. Critics argued that the bite points model often ignored individual agency and the diverse motivations that can lead people to join and remain in cult-like groups. Despite these criticisms, Hassan's model proved to be commercially successful, serving as a framework for his anti-cult workshops, training programs, and consulting services. Hassan's commitment to the anti-cult industry was further solidified through his widespread appearances in media, conferences, and educational seminars. These engagements often served as opportunities for Hassan to market his work while reinforcing the image of himself as an authoritative figure in the field. His anti-cult conferences, in particular, became major revenue-generating events, complete with paid workshops, product sales, and speaking fees. While these events were framed as efforts to educate the public and provide support to former members, they also highlighted the commercial nature of Hassan's enterprise. Attendees were frequently encouraged to purchase his books, pay for private counseling sessions, or become members of CAN, which operated as a semi-commercial organization with funding from both public and private sources. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of Hassan's career is his continued promotion of deprogramming, a practice that has been widely criticized for its ethical and legal ramifications. As one of the key figures in the anti-cult movement, Hassan has been unflinching in his support of deprogramming, arguing that it is an essential tool for liberating individuals from the influence of cults. However, his advocacy for deprogramming has been scrutinized for its potential to infringe on personal autonomy and for its alignment with more aggressive anti-cult practices. The profitability of deprogramming, both for Hassan and the broader anti-cult industry, cannot be ignored. His role in promoting and legitimizing deprogramming has been a significant source of both income and influence, further illustrating the commercialization of his work. Hassan's ability to monetize his anti-cult activities has not gone unnoticed, with many questioning the transparency of his financial arrangements. His workshops and books are often marketed as essential resources for those seeking to understand and combat cult dynamics, yet they also serve as primary vehicles for generating income. Hassan's reputation as a leading anti-cult expert has been bolstered by his media appearances and collaborations with law enforcement and mental health professionals. But these partnerships have also raised concerns about the ethical boundaries of his work. Critics argue that Hassan's willingness to align with powerful institutions may come at the expense of his independence, as his methods and messages are shaped by the interests of those who fund or promote his work. Ultimately, Steve Hassan's career in the anti-cult industry reflects a broader pattern within the field: the transformation of personal experiences into a commercial enterprise that may prioritize profit over the well-being of those it purports to help. While his contributions to the anti-cult movement cannot be entirely dismissed, his career also underscores the complexities and controversies surrounding the role of ex-members in shaping the industry. As we continue to examine other anti-cult figures, Hassan's story serves as a cautionary example of the potential pitfalls that arise when personal narratives and financial incentives become intertwined in the pursuit of public credibility and influence. A comparative analysis. Other notable ex-members in the anti-cult industry. The rise of ex-members like Steve Hassan as anti-cult experts is not an isolated phenomenon. It is part of a broader trend that includes a diverse cast of individuals who have leveraged their past affiliations to build careers in the anti-cult movement. Figures such as Rick Allen Ross, Margaret Taylor Singer, and William Schnoes exemplify the ways in which ex-cult members have transitioned into influential positions within this industry, often with motivations and practices that mirror Hassan's own. These individuals, however, bring unique perspectives and strategies to their work, further complicating the picture of the anti-cult movement and its effectiveness. Rick Allen Ross is often regarded as one of the most prominent deprogrammers associated with the anti-cult movement. With a career spanning several decades, Ross worked as a deprogrammer for some of the most high-profile cases in the history of the movement. His early work in the 1970s positioned him as a key figure in the deprogramming of Unification Church members, and he quickly gained notoriety for his aggressive tactics and unorthodox methods. Ross's approach was characterized by his use of psychological coercion, often involving the manipulation of loved ones to facilitate a deprogramming. While he framed these actions as necessary for the rescue of cult members, critics argue that his methods often crossed ethical boundaries and contributed to the stigmatization of former members. Ross's work has been scrutinized for its lack of formal training and the potential harm it could inflict on families, raising critical questions about the overall intentions behind his anti-cult interventions. Similarly, Margaret Taylor Singer, another prominent figure in the anti-cult movement, has played a significant role in shaping the discourse around cult behavior and deprogramming. Singer's academic background and her association with prestigious institutions lent her a veneer of legitimacy that many other anti-cult experts lack. Her writings, particularly the book Cults in Our Midst, became foundational texts for the anti-cult industry, offering a framework for understanding the dynamics of cults. However, like Hassan, Singer has faced criticism for her role in promoting the stigmatization of cult members and for the commercialization of her expertise. Her work has been critiqued for perpetuating the idea that all cults are inherently harmful, a stance that may not only be inaccurate but also undermines the nuanced experiences of former members and those who may have chosen to remain in the group without experiencing harm. Singer's prominence has also raised questions about the extent to which her academic affiliations have been leveraged to bolster her anti-cult agenda, further blurring the lines between genuine advocacy and profit-seeking. William Schnoes, a former member of the Children of God, now known as the Family International, represents another organization within the anti-cult movement. Schnoes' journey from a deeply involved member of a controversial religious group to a leading anti-cult advocate illustrates the complexities of ex-member activism. Schnoes' transition into the anti-cult industry was marked by his founding of the Fellowship for the Advancement of Political Awareness, FAPA, which later evolved into the International Cultic Studies Association, ICSA. These organizations focused on promoting awareness of cult behavior but also served as platforms for Schnoes to advance his own political and social agendas. Critics argue that Schnoes' anti-cult work, while ostensibly aimed at supporting former members, often prioritized political activism over genuine support for individuals impacted by cult dynamics. His tendency to conflate cult behavior with more general issues of authoritarianism and social control has led to accusations of oversimplification and opportunism, further complicating the ethical landscape of the anti-cult movement. What unites these figures is not only their former affiliations but also the ways in which they have commodified their experiences within the anti-cult industry. Each of these individuals has built a career around the narratives of their pasts, often turning their personal histories into products marketed to the public, law enforcement, and mental health professionals. For instance, Hassan's bite points model, Ross's deprogramming tactics, and Singer's academic literature have all served as revenue streams, generating income through workshops, books, and consulting services. These commercial strategies have been criticized for reducing complex issues of personal freedom, mental health, and group dynamics to easily consumable products, often at the expense of the individuals who have been most affected by cult environments. Moreover, the financial incentives that drive the anti-cult industry are significant and cannot be overlooked. As ex-members transition into roles as anti-cult experts, they often find themselves in positions where their credibility and influence are closely tied to their ability to generate income. This dynamic can lead to a prioritization of sensationalist narratives and the perpetuation of fear around cults, as ex-members may feel compelled to maintain a sense of urgency and alarm to sustain their public profiles and financial success. The anti-cult movement, therefore, becomes not only a space for advocacy but also a lucrative industry where the very individuals meant to help victims may be more focused on their own gain. In summary, the trajectories of Hassan, Ross, Singer, and Schnoes reveal a complex interplay of personal motivations, ethical dilemmas, and financial incentives that characterize the anti-cult industry. While these figures may present themselves as advocates for victims, their work is often shaped by the same dynamics that they once opposed. As the anti-cult movement continues to evolve, it remains crucial to critically assess the motivations and practices of these ex-members, ensuring that the industry does not become a self-reinforcing cycle of exploitation and profit-seeking. The next section will explore the broader implications of the Unification Church and the anti-cult narrative. The Unification Church, often portrayed as a sinister cult by anti-cult experts, presents a complex and multifaceted perspective that challenges the narrative promoted by figures like Steve Hassan. Established in 1954 by Sun Myung Moon, the church has evolved over decades into a religious movement with a global following, emphasizing the principles of Christian theology, family values, and world peace. Its members, often termed Moonies in the media, have been the subject of intense scrutiny, particularly during the 1970s and 1980s, when the church expanded aggressively in North America. However, the portrayal of the Unification Church as a manipulative and destructive organization has been critiqued as both reductive and misleading. One of the central arguments against the anti-cult narrative is that it often relies on selective storytelling and moral panic rather than objective analysis. While Hassan and other anti-cult figures highlight the psychological manipulation techniques within the Unification Church, they frequently overlook the diverse experiences of its members. For many, the church has provided a sense of community, purpose, and spiritual fulfillment. The Unificationist movement has played a significant role in political and social activism, including efforts to bring people of different faiths together and promote peace through interfaith dialogue. By focusing solely on the negative aspects of the Unification Church, anti-cult experts may unintentionally perpetuate a harmful stereotype that fails to acknowledge the agency and complexity of its members. Moreover, the methods employed by anti-cult experts to interpret and represent the Unification Church often lack academic rigor and independent verification. The majority of literature and commentary on the Unification Church has been produced by former members, particularly those who have transitioned into the anti-cult industry. This insider perspective, while valuable in some respects, also raises questions about bias and objectivity. Critics argue that by relying primarily on the accounts of ex-members who have since profited from their past affiliations, the anti-cult movement may inadvertently reinforce a narrative that is more reflective of the ex-members' experiences than the actual realities of the group. As a result, the Unification Church is often framed in a way that prioritizes sensationalism over factual accuracy, leading to a distorted understanding of its beliefs, practices, and impact on society. The ethical implications of anti-cult methods. The methods employed by anti-cult experts like Steve Hassan have drawn significant ethical criticism, particularly regarding the potential for re-traumatization and the promotion of stigmatization among former cult members. Hassan's deprogramming model, for instance, has been widely criticized for its aggressive and coercive tactics, which often involve isolating individuals from their former group, restructuring their thought patterns, and discrediting the beliefs they once held. While Hassan claims that deprogramming is essential for helping former members reclaim their autonomy, critics argue that the process can be deeply harmful. By treating ex-members as victims in need of correction rather than as individuals with agency, these methods risk reinforcing the same psychological manipulation they claim to combat. The re-traumatization of former cult members can result in long-term distress, particularly if the deprogramming process invalidates their legitimate emotional and spiritual experiences or imposes an external agenda rather than allowing them to process their past on their own terms. Furthermore, the reliance on ex-cult members as the primary authority in deprogramming and anti-cult work has contributed to the stigmatization of those who have left groups like the Unification Church. Many former members report feeling judged, pitied, or even ridiculed by anti-cult experts and the broader anti-cult industry. Hassan's workshops and training programs often emphasize a binary view of cult involvement, portraying it as inherently harmful and those who left as victims in need of intervention. This framing can undermine the individual experiences of former members, who may have had complex and varied reasons for joining or leaving the group. Some individuals may have benefited from their time in the Unification Church in terms of personal growth, community, or purpose, yet the anti-cult narrative frequently dismisses these positive aspects in favor of reinforcing fear and guilt. The stigmatization of former members does not only affect their psychological well-being but also discourages them from speaking openly about their experiences, limiting the potential for balanced and nuanced discussions about cult dynamics. Moreover, the broader anti-cult movement, with its emphasis on deprogramming and the vilification of groups like the Unification Church, has led to the marginalization of voices that challenge the dominant narrative. Critics argue that anti-cult experts often operate in an echo chamber, where dissenting perspectives, such as those of former members who did not experience harm or who continue to find value in their affiliations, are dismissed or ridiculed. This one-sided approach not only limits the scope of the anti-cult discourse but also reinforces a harmful cycle of fear and misinformation. When ex-members are presented as the sole arbiters of truth about cult behavior, it discourages independent inquiry and fosters an environment in which alternative viewpoints are devalued. The ethical implications of this approach are profound. Rather than supporting the liberation of individuals from harmful ideologies, the anti-cult movement may be perpetuating a system of control and judgment, reinforcing the very narratives it claims to dismantle. Questioning the legitimacy of anti-cult experts. In light of the criticisms surrounding anti-cult experts and their methods, it becomes clear that the issue demands a more comprehensive approach that extends beyond the narratives of former members like Steve Hassan. The current anti-cult industry, driven in large part by ex-members who have transitioned into positions of authority, is fundamentally flawed in its structure and philosophy. The reliance on ex-members as primary sources of expertise raises serious concerns about the credibility and objectivity of the field, as their personal experiences and motivations are often inseparable from their commercial and political interests. To address these ethical and practical issues, the anti-cult movement must be transformed to ensure that it genuinely supports former members while avoiding the pitfalls of self-promotion and ideological bias. One potential solution is to shift the focus of anti-cult work away from ex-members and toward independent, evidence-based research conducted by neutral academic and psychological institutions. While former members can provide valuable insights, their accounts must be critically evaluated and contextualized within a broader framework of social, psychological, and religious studies. By incorporating empirical research and interdisciplinary perspectives, the anti-cult movement can move beyond subjective interpretations and develop more nuanced understandings of group dynamics and individual experiences. This approach would require greater collaboration between psychologists, anthropologists, and legal scholars to assess the impact of cult affiliations and interventions in a way that prioritizes the well-being of individuals over sensationalized narratives. Additionally, the anti-cult industry must re-evaluate its financial and ethical structures to prevent the commercialization of former members' experiences. Instead of allowing ex-members to profit from deprogramming, anti-cult workshops, and consulting services, the movement should be supported by public or non-profit funding sources that do not incentivize sensationalism or fear-based marketing. Government agencies and mental health organizations should take an active role in regulating the anti-cult industry, ensuring that interventions and support services are grounded in ethical and scientifically validated practices. This would involve establishing clear standards for deprogramming and counseling, emphasizing informed consent, and moving away from coercive methods that may do more harm than good. To truly support former cult members, the anti-cult movement must also embrace a more inclusive and balanced perspective that recognizes the diversity of experiences within groups like the Unification Church. Rather than treating all cult members as victims or all groups as inherently harmful, anti-cult experts should acknowledge the complexity of human behavior and the reasons why individuals choose to remain in certain organizations. This would involve fostering open dialogue, encouraging former members to articulate their own narratives, and avoiding the tendency to universalize negative experiences. By shifting the focus from stigmatization and fear to support and understanding, the anti-cult movement can evolve into a more ethical and effective framework for helping those who seek to leave cult environments on their own terms. The business of anti-cult advocacy. The anti-cult industry, deeply entrenched in the narratives and experiences of ex-members like Steve Hassan, is not merely an extension of personal trauma but a commercial enterprise with substantial financial incentives. For figures such as Hassan, Deprogramming and anti-cult consulting are not just professional pursuits but avenues for generating significant income. This financial motivation is reflected in the extensive marketing of anti-cult resources, which include high-fee workshops, best-selling books, and lucrative speaking engagements. Hassan, for instance, has built a career around his Bite Points model and anti-cult training programs, many of which are monetized through paid seminars and conferences. These events not only serve as educational forums but also as profit centers, with attendees expected to purchase additional materials and services to further engage with Hassan's methodological framework. The commodification of anti-cult advocacy is further amplified by the industry's reliance on media appearances and public speaking ventures. Hassan, Ross, Singer, and other ex-members frequently leverage their anti-cult credentials to gain visibility in popular culture and the news media, often at a financial cost to the public and institutions involved. Their appearances as anti-cult experts on radio shows, television programs, and panels contribute to the perpetuation of a lucrative personal brand, while simultaneously aligning with the broader anti-cult narrative of alarmism. In many cases, these public engagements are sponsored or paid, further entrenching the financial motivations behind their advocacy. The anti-cult industry thus operates as a self-reinforcing business model, in which the need to generate income is as significant as the need to support former cult members or discourage involvement in groups like the Unification Church. Moreover, the anti-cult industry is supported by a web of organizations and funding sources that further bolster the financial incentives for ex-members. Groups like the International Cultic Studies Association and the Cult Awareness Network provide institutional backing for anti-cult experts, enabling the commercial aspects of their work through membership fees, publication sales, and consulting services. These organizations often serve as intermediaries between anti-cult experts and the public, offering a platform for the dissemination of anti-cult ideologies while simultaneously benefiting financially from the continued growth of the industry. The financial success of these organizations is closely tied to the prominence of their affiliated experts, highlighting the interdependent and commercial nature of the anti-cult movement. The reliance on financial incentives raises ethical concerns about the credibility and impartiality of anti-cult advocates. When figures like Hassan profit directly from the promotion of fear, coercion, and stigmatization, the true motivations behind their advocacy become difficult to distinguish from self-interest. The anti-cult industry, therefore, must be scrutinized for its role in perpetuating a system in which ex-members are not just advocates for reform but also beneficiaries of a commercialized discourse on cult behavior and deprogramming. Conclusion: reassessing the role of anti-cult experts. The exploration of the anti-cult industry, particularly as it relates to ex-members like Steve Hassan, reveals a complex and often problematic landscape shaped by self-interest, financial incentives, and ethical ambiguity. While these figures present themselves as advocates for those who have left controversial groups like the Unification Church, their roles as former members, paid consultants, and deprogramming experts raise critical questions about their credibility and the integrity of their work. Hassan's commercialization of his anti-cult efforts, combined with the broader industry's reliance on ex-members as primary authorities, underscores the need for a more rigorous and transparent evaluation of the industry and its core assumptions. The anti-cult movement has long positioned itself as a necessary force to counter the influence of groups like the Unification Church, warning the public about the dangers of cult affiliations and offering interventions based on the experiences of ex-members. However, as demonstrated in this examination, the movement's structure and methodologies often prioritize sensationalism, financial gain, and fear-based narratives over genuine support for former members. The fact that many anti-cult experts, including Hassan, have built careers around the very groups they once belonged to, raises concerns about bias and the potential for exploitation. Their accounts, while valuable in certain contexts, must be critically assessed rather than accepted as definitive truth, particularly when these experts profit from the narratives they promote. Additionally, the ethical implications of deprogramming and coercive anti-cult interventions cannot be ignored. The aggressive methods employed by anti-cult experts, justified in the name of rescuing cult members, often mirror the very tactics they claim to combat. The re-traumatization of former members, the stigmatization of groups like the Unification Church, and the reliance on ex-members as the sole authority on cult behavior all point to a flawed and potentially harmful system. The need for a more balanced and evidence-based approach to anti-cult advocacy is evident, as the current model risks prioritizing spectacle over support, profit over genuine assistance, and ideological confrontation over nuanced understanding. Ultimately, the anti-cult industry must be critically examined, not only for its financial and ethical concerns but also for the broader implications it has on public perception and policy. While there may be genuine concerns regarding groups like the Unification Church, the credibility of those who warn of these dangers must be scrutinized. The question remains whether these anti-cult experts are truly advocating for the well-being of former members, or if their work is ultimately an extension of the personal and commercial motivations that have driven the industry for decades.